Alabama Moon, Chapter 51, page 289. How much further? I asked. About a mile. I sat up in my seat and stared ahead. The sun was settling outside my window, and the smell of soybeans and corn was strong on the cool dusk. In the cool dusk. We had skirted the outside of the city and were moving into the countryside again. To the east, I could see the tall buildings of downtown Mobile standing against the horizon. How much further now? Uncle Mike pointed ahead of us. That house up there? The first thing I noticed about Uncle Mike's house was that it was one-story brick home backed up to pecan orchard. I like pecan trees. Well, we've got a bunch. They had put up a small banner on the fence that read, "Welcome home, Moon," and my new family came out of the house and stood in the yard as we drove up. I felt my hands growing fidgety, and I looked at Uncle Mike. "What do I do?" He laughed. "You'll be okay. Just get out of the truck and meet everybody." I felt my face burning red as Aunt Sarah knelt down and hugged me. My new brother David was only a year older than me, and my new sister Alice a year younger. They said hello, and I nodded at them while my face was pressed into Aunt Sarah's bosom. She finally pushed me back by the shoulders and stared at me. "He looks just like his mother." "They say he doesn't eat like her," Uncle Mike said. Aunt Sarah stood and sniffled and wiped her. Aunt Sarah stood and sniffled and wiped her eyes. "We'll just have to see about that," she said. "Are you hungry, Moon?" "Yes, ma'am. I can't imagine all you've been through. I'm going to have to feed you 4 times a day to get some meat on your bones." "I feel pretty good now, but I'd like 4 times a day." She laughed and turned around. "My Lord," she said, "let's all go inside." David and Alice crowded beside me while we walked. David kept glancing over at me. "I heard you beat up grown men," he finally said. "I had to whip up on a couple people. People were chasing me all over." "They said you had your own rifle." I nodded. "Me and Pat both." "I've got some climbing spikes Daddy gave me." "Climbing spikes?" "Yeah, you can strap them on your legs and climb up a tree straight as a pole." "Man, I want to see those. What else you got?" Uncle Mike laughed and put his hands on my back. "You two will have time for all that later. Let's go inside and get Moon cleaned up and fed." The house had 3 bedrooms. Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah slept in one, and Alice had another. I was to share the last room with David. My bed hadn't arrived yet, but Aunt Sarah assured me that it would look just like David's. She showed me the place where my bed would go and a closet where I could put my things. "I don't have much," I told her. "Just some old traps and some clothes I made. Got Pap's personal box." "We'll take care of that," she said. "You'll have the same things that every other boy has." I looked at David and he smiled and nodded that they'd been talking about it. We seated ourselves around the dinner table and Aunt Sarah served pork roast and creamed spinach and buttered sourdough bread. It was better than any food I'd had in the forest or in jail or at Pinson or even at Howe's. At first nobody said much, but I could feel them watching me. I was uncomfortable at the table and did my best to hold my silverware the right way. Eventually Uncle Mike reached over and took my bread and pinched it with took Eventually, Uncle Mike reached over and took my bread and pinched my pork with it and held it out for me like a sandwich. I set my fork and knife down and smiled and took it from him. Everyone began to laugh, and before long we were all eating our pork and a sandwich. "So, show us something, Moon," Uncle Mike said. "Like what?" "Make an animal sound," David said. "What do you want to hear?" "Your best one." "It's a loud one," I warned them. "Do it anyway." Aunt Sarah set her glass down. "I don't know if it's okay, Sarah," Uncle Mike said. I set my sandwich down and got out of my chair. I bent over so my hands were rested on my knees and sucked in my breath and twisted my face in the right way. I made the sound of a bobcat scream. Rawr! When I looked up, everyone was staring at me with wide eyes. After a second, Uncle Mike began to clap. Aunt Sarah scooted her chair back and wiped the corners of her mouth with her napkin. "My Lord," she said. "That's a bobcat. Supposed to sound like a screaming woman," I told her. "A wolf," David yelled. Aunt Sarah shifted in her chair and straightened her back. "Now, I don't know about a wolf." "Me neither," I said. "There's no wolves in Alabama. I know a coyote, though." "Coyote, then," Alice said. I looked up at the ceiling, pursed my lips, and began barking like a coyote. Yip, 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 yip. When I looked down, David was sitting on top of his chair back and leaning forward towards me. What else? He stammered. Deer? David and Alice nodded, and I tossed my head from side to side and snorted like a flagged deer. That's enough for now, Aunt Sarah said. Moon, you're very talented. They're going to love you at school, David said. I smiled and got back into my chair. You think so? Yeah, nobody can do all those sounds. After we finished our meal, I told them about the living in the forest. I described how Pap and I had built the shelter and the types of books that we studied. They wanted to know about the strangest things we had eaten, and I told them about the armadillo stew and the snake rolls. I told about the time that it rained real hard and a rattlesnake family tried to move into the shelter with us. They listened to me late into the night until Alice fell asleep against Uncle Mike's shoulder. I think it's time for us all to go to bed, he said. It's been a big day. After saying good night to David and Alice, Sarah got a blanket from the closet and spread it over the sofa for me. When she was done, she put her hand on my back and asked me if it was okay sleeping in the living room my first night with him. It's better than the pine straw and ticks, I said. I like it just fine. She smiled and yawned. I'm glad you're so easy to please, Moon. Good night, you two. Good night, I said. I lay on the sofa and pulled the blanket up to my chin. Uncle Mike sat across from me in a chair. You still okay? He finally said. I nodded. I know you've been through some tough times. I don't expect you just to slide into things around here. There's a lot to get used to. I'm feeling better already. It takes time to start a new life, especially when you've come from a background as different as yours. I felt the soft pillow under my head and listened to the ticking of the mantel clock. I like everything about this place. Uncle Mike smiled. His eyes told me what I needed to know about the type of father he would be. They were Pap's own eyes, but there was something more gentle and calm about them. I could tell he wanted to say something that would make me feel better about all I'd been through in the last few months, but he didn't need to say anything. I'm going to be fine, I told him. You don't need to worry about me.